somehow pulling and nagging, and then the stabbing of the foot and the blood on the wedding dress. To what extent is this kind of the kernel of a lot of the things that you're exploring?
Well, it is positioned exactly at the centre of the book. It is the central moment. Like, you know, literature obviously should start in the middle, and memoir tends to start at the beginning. And his memoir seems to start at the beginning, but actually the initial primal trauma shows that, or suggests that our births are entering a story, another story in the middle. The bits I read out, and I hope it wasn't too scattergun, that's not exactly how that scene reads. I chose a few separate sections just to show. I would say that pretty much encompasses the different styles and the different registers, and bits with humour, and then historical parts, and also parts where Dr. Shine is very much going back into his own internal thinking and internal traumas. Yeah, I hope when that chapter is read, it is a slightly less intense bombardment. It's pacing, I think, but it definitely is the central kernel. I wanted it to encapsulate everything in the middle.
There's some.
We've got Margaret here.
Let's do one here, and then at the back, and then here.
As you know, I was curious how you understood what it's like to love a disabled child so much more than a normal child. And also, how did you get all the layers of Israel before you were born and, you know, all the way back? How did you made that very much alive also? The depth of time, and how do you understand loving a disabled child so well?
Well, I'm very pleased that you felt that that love coming through in the text. I wrote it while my wife was pregnant with our first child, and I think, as we all know, those are, when you go through having your first child and you're going to all of these tests and you're going to all of these things, and it doesn't take much imagination to think of worst possible outcomes or difficult outcomes, and difficult outcomes that end up not being worst possible outcomes, because you have all of this love, and in fact, just like I suppose his love for Ori, the worse it gets, the more he loves her. So I'm just happy that it had that effect. I mean, I was very moved myself writing it, so I hope that was communicated. I love that little girl yet, yeah, I'm pleased that you felt that. In terms of the research really angle, but I suppose you mean it's not just research, there's a feeling about it. No, a lot of that's just academic. I mean, I studied Israel, and I read, and I think.
I don't mean how did you find the facts. I mean, how did you speak in all those voices?
It was fairly instinctive. I think the difference in my writing about Israel came as my Hebrew improved. So my writing about Israel in English improved once I could start to understand the different tones and registers of different Israelis from different backgrounds and different origins, and the, you know, the kibbutz galuyot, and trying to get all of those threads, those separate threads, and then weave them together to give some idea of the patchwork that creates Israel as a place, and then to create that patchwork through a character that can then allegorize the whole of the country. The hardest part was choosing, really was the most banal thing, was choosing music. I wish sometimes that I could actually play some of the songs while people are reading, because they're not just placeholders, they actually inform the chapters. And that was quite hard, because I wanted to choose music that people would hear incidentally on the radio, not the sort of most famous greatest hits of Israeli history, because you could choose one a decade, but that it wouldn't have the quality that I was going for, which was incidental stuff. So that kind of research was tougher. In terms of acquiring the voice, I'm just very pleased that it feels authentic. Thank you.
Sorry, I haven't read the book yet, but I will remedy that.
Okay, excellent. That's good.
But I was just wondering, from a couple of hints that you may have dropped, or I may have misunderstood, whether in any sense at all, it's intended as an allegory for the birth of the State of Israel and the things that have happened in the lifetime of the state of Israel.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I think that the people often talk about Israel without talking about Israelis, and it's I find a very strange way of approaching a nation. It is certainly an allegory, because the people make up the nation, and the people have, in a very wide and very individual and very idiosyncratic and very different ways, all suffered some form of trauma. And to understand Israel without understanding those psychological individual traumas and how they build collectively to create a national psyche, I think is to understand Israel, you have to really start to understand its people. And I don't think enough people invest enough time doing that. I think they talk fairly offhand and in rather clumsy brushstrokes in a way that's, I think, lacks a certain humanity. So, yeah, it is certainly an allegory, and you know, Israel is ultimately about its people, and they're great people.
Here, somebody who was born in Israel but lived here much longer, I can see that you've got a very deep understanding of the Israeli society. However, your upbringing and education was in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So don't you find sometimes conflicting with your writing in general, because it's so diverse, the two cultures?
I agree they're extremely different cultures. I think some of these things come down to personality type, and just to be a bit autobiographical, when I moved to Israel, I felt very comfortable there. And I know a lot of Israelis that feel very comfortable in New York or in Sydney, and different people like different places. I felt very much at home in Israel. To go back a bit, my first degree was in ancient history, and I spent my gap year when most people wanted to go to Thailand and places like that in the Eastern Mediterranean. And my first love was Greece, and I loved the culture of Greece. And I feel that I have a sort of where I love to be most is a sort of Eastern Mediterranean sensibility. So I didn't find, coming from this northern cold country, that I was so immediately put off by the cuisine and the heat and when you're in Tel Aviv, there's only one place that's probably louder is Athens, and if you like the baking heat and the hooting horns of St. Agnes Square, then you can pretty much handle Kikar Rabin, right? It's not such a leap. So yeah, it's I think it's about my personality as much as anything general.
Who's the question?
Hi. So my question kind of follows on from the last question. I was thinking, obviously being from here and moving to what can sometimes be a very challenging country, did you find that writing this book in Israel kind of was cathartic and reconciled your place there and kind of solidified your permanent place in Israel?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but I think more importantly, it was actually, in some ways, it's also about my place here, and being British, and understanding Israel was also about understanding where I come from in Britain and all of those things. And I know, Isotta lived very close to me in Tel Aviv for some time, and was for a year, and is a major fan, I think, of the place. And
Thought you were going to say of you.
and of me. But yeah, writing, to go back to that, writing, I think, is something that a lot of people who move, and certainly we know that in English literature, especially in English post-colonial literature, that desire to find and explain and understand homecoming and displacement and alienation and all of those things, it definitely helps. However, the problem with that is writing is the most agonizing, torturous, and in itself it's actually quite a depressing activity. So I'm not sure it actually helped on a day-to-day basis, but I suppose as a culmination, yeah.
It's therapeutic.
Therapeutic.
I was wondering if it was therapeutic to kind of put down when you were writing about kind of your feelings towards Israel.
It's not, yeah, no, not yeah. I mean, writing is therapeutic to me, I find going deep into the story that I was telling here, it was quite traumatizing to write, to be honest. It made me, I wouldn't say it helped. I mean, I would say in some levels it made me more insecure. But it certainly made me feel closer to the country. It made me feel closer to my environment. And part of being close to that environment is understanding the reality of that environment. And the reality of that environment is unfortunately not very easy. So yeah, it did help.
Does it, I mean, this is sort of coming off that, but do you feel like you, in some way, sort of wrote yourself into your new home? And do you think of home as somewhere that one always on some level comes back to, or can you create or move into a sense of home without a background? I mean, obviously there is a background, but...
Right, so Israel as a place is interesting because obviously it's a place of homecoming for people escaping other homes that have been destroyed. So it's, now we said Dr. Sayers is an expert on the form of nostalgia.
Not
so I feel that she may catch around. But yes, definitely, it's not only about my writing to come to terms with the new place I find myself. It's because the whole country is a country trying to write itself into what it is. Mm. It's a new country, and every single individual is in their own ways narrating their new existence as Israelis. And what's remarkable about Israelis is that on a surface level, you don't get that much angst, interestingly. And I find a lot of Israeli literature, as a result, has the kind of typical Sabra, strong kind of character, but underneath there is clear angst. And I think, for instance, Amos Oz's his most successful novel is when he opened up in memoir about himself and about those things that often in Israeli literature they're put slightly at a distance. Mm-hmm. Because people can't deal with trauma every day. They need